Well, I've got Brother Woody kind of gave me a heads up last night that he may not be here, and then I didn't get the final nod till about 2 o'clock today when I was at work, and good thing I didn't need a nap. So I kind of rushed through a few things, but I want to kind of start back and look back at some things that Brother Kelly mentioned last Sunday night. And I want to go a little bit farther than that, too. A few weeks before that, Brother Donnie was gone somewhere and asked me to fill in on a Sunday night. I think he was in Israel. Asked me to fill in on a Sunday night. And when we talked on Sunday night, I mentioned one of my childhood heroes, I guess, or one of my favorite basketball players by the name of Pete Maravich. Y'all remember we were talking about Pete Maravich? I love Pete Maravich. I had a little connection. My dad went to LSU, and he was there when Pete was there, and I love watching Pete Maravich, some of the old videos of Pete Maravich playing basketball, and how Pete lived a life of consistency. One of the news reporters came to him after the Tulane and LSU game and said, "Pete," he said, "what makes you such a good basketball player? What makes you the best basketball player in the country?" He thought for a second. He said, "Well, as soon as I get on the court, all I think about is putting the ball in the goal." That was it. He didn't have any distractions. So we talked about not having distractions, talking about being holy that night. And last Sunday night, Brother Kelly mentioned a few things about change, if y'all are all here. And Brother Kelly opened us up with a song last Sunday night. So if y'all don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and open us up with a song tonight. Go ahead, Kim. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that to y'all. Y'all thought I was going to, didn't y'all? Brother Kelly opened us up with a song last Sunday night, did a great job, but he talked about change. And so tonight I want to talk a little bit about change and kind of go a little bit farther. But he said one thing. He said sometimes when you have change or there's changes created in your life, it has a ripple effect, and it affects everyone around you. Y'all remember when he said that? A ripple effect. I recommend y'all go on Facebook and watch it. I don't know if it's on YouTube or not, but you can go on Facebook and listen to Brother Kelly sing and listen to Brother Kelly's message. We talked about ripple effect. So we talked about Pistol Pete, one of the greatest athletes that ever lived, a couple of Sunday nights ago. And tonight I want to talk about one of the greatest athletes that ever lived that you've never heard of. Now, I'm an Olympic fanatic. I love the Olympics. It doesn't matter if it's the Winter Olympics, the Summer Olympics. When the Olympics are going on in my house, I'm watching them. And I don't only just watch the Olympics, but I stand in front of the TV. If we're skiing, I'm skiing. If we're jumping hurdles, I'm jumping hurdles. You know, I love the Olympics. And a couple of years ago in 2016, when the Olympics was at Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, the opening night of the Olympics, I got home from work. I was all excited. Okay, so we got to watch the Olympics. We got our food. We sat down and started watching the Olympics. And one of the first events we watched was the 10-meter air pistol. Didn't y'all watch? Nobody watched a 10-meter air pistol? It was actually pretty blah, really. But as it's developing through the whole 10-meter air pistol, the favorite fell out. And the second favorite fell out. And the third favorite fell out. These commentators are building this thing up to where it's just going to be this dramatic end to the 10-meter. So it's 10 meters, so they're shooting 10 meters. I'm not quite how far really that is, but 10 meters, and they're shooting an air pistol. And whoever gets the closest, they go through all these different stages, and they're whittling down from a whole bunch of people down to 3 and 4 and 2. And the final 2 was a guy from Vietnam named Hoang. I pronounce saying his name. I'm not going to be able to get it right. X-U-I-N, so it's Yuan, and Vien is his last name. Kimberly, go ahead and put that picture up. That's a picture of him. He won the very first gold medal ever in the history of Vietnam. The very first gold medal ever by a Vietnamese athlete. So the Vietnamese have been competing since 1952 in the Olympics. They've had 23 athletes, Olympic athletes, over 10 different sports. When we're going to call him Hoeg, because I don't really know how to pronounce that, but when he realized he was going to win, crocodile tears just come streaming down his face because he knew he was going to be the greatest athlete in Vietnam history. He went back to the country of Vietnam as the greatest athlete ever in Vietnam. And he went on later on to win the silver in the 50-meter air pistol, which wasn't even his best sport, but he catapulted his gold right into a silver and went back as the most decorated Vietnamese Olympic. And the commentator at the very end, I watched this several times. I watched it again last night. The commentator at the very end, I don't know who the commentator's name was. The 10-meter air pistol does not get Bob Costas or all the good commentators. But this guy said, this is what the Olympics are all about when he won the gold medal. But they were painting the picture of him winning a medal halfway through it, not thinking he was going to win the gold, but he shot a bullseye on the very last shot and won by 0.4 points. Got him from the bullseye. So once he won the whole thing. But he said, this is what the Olympics are all about. So this is pretty cool too, doing some research into him. He won by winning. Your country pays you a little money when you win. So Vietnam said, we're going to pay you some money when you don't win a medal, because nobody's going to win a medal, because nobody's won a medal since 1952. So we're going to pay you some money when you don't win. But he actually won. So he came home with $213,320 US. That's how much he won for winning the gold and the silver medal in 2016. So some of our athletes make that much money on a commercial. 30-second spot. They make that much money. Not very much money at all. So let's put that in perspective. Okay, so that's equivalent to about 5 billion, with a B, 5 billion Vietnamese dollars. That's a doag, a dong is the Vietnamese dollar. But the plural thing, I saw a couple different ways. If you speak Vietnamese, let me know. Raise your hand. I'll let you read. Nobody? Okay. So that's equivalent to about 5 billion doag or dong. So the annual salary for a Vietnamese person, this is going from U.S. dollars to Vietnamese dollars, obviously, is about 72 million dong is the average salary. So this guy took home with him 69 years of money, of average salary, equivalent to 69 years average salary in Vietnam for shooting an air pistol at 10 meters. You don't think this changed his life? This changed his life, and this changed his family, and this changed his whole community. When he went back to Vietnam, they threw parades. You can take the picture down, keep it. They threw parades. They threw all this stuff. They printed pictures with his shirt on it, shirts with his picture on it. I mean, it was unreal, the stuff they rolled out for this guy. And he's going to be favored in the next Olympics. I'm so excited to watch the 10-meter pistol. We may have a watch party, the 10-meter pistol shooting event in the next Olympics. So why do I bring all this up? I bring all this up because the commentator said this is what the Olympics is all about. He changed his community, he changed his family, he changed everybody that's around him. So now tonight we're going to talk about someone in the Bible, a very minor character. This guy wasn't even a major character in Olympics. He wasn't a major character on the athletic floor at all. Nobody even knows who he is. But tonight we're going to talk about a minor character kind of stuck there in the book of Acts, how she changed her community and her family and everybody that's around her the same way. So y'all flip over to Acts chapter 9. And we'll look a little bit out of, I've got my office Bible tonight, so it's a New King James, the John Maxwell New King James Bible. So we'll look at that tonight. But I want to talk about a disciple in the Bible named Dorcas, or you may see it as Tabitha, if you depend on your translation, or you may actually have both of it in there. We're going to talk about Tabitha. So kind of giving a context of where we are before we read, Paul was just baptized the chapter before this. This is Paul's missions hadn't happened yet. Paul's ministry hadn't happened yet. Luke is putting us in the place of a believer in the new, very, very fresh New Testament church. So I like to think about this as like a firework. We all pop fireworks like fireworks. When you light a firework, what happens? You got a little bit, you may see these little sparks going on, and it's about to go poof and take off, and then it does this boom. Well, the firework hadn't even left the box yet. This is the ministry of Paul. He hadn't even left the box yet. He just got baptized. Peter's been taking the whole church on his shoulders, and running with it. Up to here, you'll see a little bit about Peter's ministry, and then later on, Luke picks up on Paul's ministry, and then he pulls it all back together. But we're very fresh in the church right now, and there's a lot of folks that really need to hear the message of Christ at this time. And Peter's, like I said, he's got that on his shoulders, and Paul's about to take that on his shoulders too as well, and start the mission work. Let me go ahead and read 36 all the way through 42, and then we'll come back and I want to look at a couple verses briefly, and then we'll kind of discuss how this story changed the community. It says, at Joppa there was a certain disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and charitable deeds, which she did. But it happened in those days that she became sick and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in the upper room. And since Lydda was near Joppa, and the disciples had heard that Peter was there, they sent 2 men to him, imploring him not to delay in coming to them. Then Peter arose and went with them. When he had come, they brought him to the upper room, and all the widows stood by him weeping, showing the tunics and garments which Dorcas had made while she was with them. But Peter put them all out, knelt down and prayed. And turning to the body, he said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. Then he gave her his hand and lifted her up. And when he had called the saints and widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed on the Lord. Man, what a neat story. This is one of those stories you'd like to be there and watching and checking it all out and kind of seeing how it all reacted. But Luke does a really good job of bringing it alive. But a couple things we look at, verse 36, it says Joppa. What do we know about Joppa? Do we know anything about Joppa? Have we heard that city before? Is that where Jonah ran off to? Yeah, where Jonah ran off to when he was running from God. When God told him to go to Nineveh, he took off and went to Joppa. I looked up on the computer Joppa, and it's present day. It's right outside Tel Aviv. It's actually Jaffe now, I think is what they called it. It's present day Tel Aviv. Now it's a beautiful town. It's right on the Mediterranean. It's got real beautiful cliffs, very beautiful blue water. It's a real good. I didn't bring any slides from my last trip to Joppa to show y'all, but there's it looked really beautiful. I would want to go there if I was Jonah. I'd want to live there if I was Tabitha too as well. But Joppa was a port town. It had a lot of mixed nationalities. You have a Greek name, and you have a Gentile, and you had all this mixed bag of folks there in Joppa. Very similar to some of the other towns that were port towns where you had all this mixed nationalities. But it's about 10 to 12 miles. We mentioned Lydda earlier or later on in the message in verse 38. It says, while Lydda was near Joppa, so it's about 10 or 12 miles. So not quite to Kirbyville, as a good walk. But Jonah had 350 miles from Nineveh to Joppa. No, from Nineveh to Joppa. So it's a long ways, but I'd say probably a little bit less than a day's time of walking. So not very far there for Peter to come up. But let's look how it describes this woman. There in verse 36, it says, this woman was full of good works and charitable deeds. Some of the other translations say, the NLT, the Living Translation, says kind things. Did kind things. The NASB says she excelled in acts of kindness. Does anybody say anything different or jumps out at you guys on that verse, how it describes Tabitha? Always doing good and helping the poor. Thanks, Miss Janice. Yeah, is y'all described? We don't usually say that. Like we don't ever say, well, Sarah, always doing good. That's not something we say much. A great person or a big heart or whatever. But Luke described her as someone that's that's always doing good. So we know she had some kind of commitment to being a great person, some kind of commitment to doing what she felt like she needed to do. And we'll kind of get into that here in a little bit as we go along. But it kind of, when I first read it, I didn't really catch it. But when I came back and read it again, I saw they also described her as a good person that did good deeds, that helped the poor. But how else does it describe her? Look in the verse 36, the first part of 36. A disciple. You don't think about this being a disciple. You think about the disciples, the 12 disciples, or actually the 13 disciples. A couple years ago, probably 6 or 8 years ago, I did a Wednesday night Bible study for, I don't know, probably 8 or 10 weeks, maybe longer than that, maybe 12, 15 weeks. And we looked at every disciple in the Bible. We never talked about Tabitha. We talked about the disciples, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, the called disciples. I did some Greek. So tonight we're going to have an English lesson, we're going to have a geography lesson, and we're going to have a Greek lesson all in one. Okay? Everybody will be able to go tell Donnie that we had a geography lesson, a Greek lesson, and an English lesson all in one. Okay? So this word is the only time it's mentioned in the Bible, and this Greek word is Matheria. Matheria. Y'all getting that word with me? Matheria. So that's that word for disciple, and this is the only time it's used in the Bible. It's not used to describe anybody else, not any other New Testament ladies in the Bible. And this is a feminine noun. So that's our English lesson. It's a feminine noun. And our Greek lesson is a mathera is how you pronounce that word, matheria. So it is described her as being someone that's a committed believer, and she is a disciple, but she is also a lady. So the early church, if you were a lady and you were widowed, your husband died or something happened, you're at the mercy of the church. You're at the mercy of anybody. You're considered to be a beggar at that time. You're at the mercy of anybody else. But Tabitha took it to her heart to take care of these people. And we'll see later on that she was a seamstress. She sewed, and she took care of clothing these ladies. You'll see it later on, the widows that came in, they showed her all these cloths. So there's probably some kind of ministry she had. I read a commentary last night that mentioned that she probably got leftover cloths from something that was being built there in Joppa, and she would come up there and she would get the leftover cloths, and she would sit down and she would sew, and she would hand out things to the ladies, and that was her ministry. She had a ministry of doing that, and it really meant a lot to her, the community, and to people that she ministered to. So we kind of got a little bit of a snapshot of who Tabitha is in our mind. We have a view of her being a disciple, so she was a devout believer. We got a view of her, like Miss Janice says, she was always doing good stuff. She was always going to do good, and she helped the needy, helped the ladies that were in need, and so she put other people in front of her, is what Luke is describing her as being. But jump down to 37. It said, in those days she became sick and died. Have no idea the background behind all this, what happened. But she apparently had been dead, and the ladies there with her had started the process of burial. The process of burial is washing the body, getting ready for the oils and the fragrances to the embalming process of her. So they've got her in the upper room, probably out of everybody's way, and they said that they had washed her. But somebody had a great idea. That great idea was to go find Peter. Why did they go find Peter? No idea. God prompted someone's heart that said, go get Peter. So the process started of somebody running 10 or 12 miles, finding Peter, and running 10 or 12 miles back with Peter. So we probably have about a day's time or so. I don't know if it's in the evening, they got back in the morning, or how it all works out. But it took about a day for this whole process to happen, for someone to go get Peter 10 or 12 miles away and come back with them. And they told him, I said, we can't delay. We're in a hurry. And it looks like Peter dropped everything he was doing, and he took off. So it said there, look, drop all the way down to verse 49. It said then, or 39. It said, then Peter arose and went with them. So really quick, When he got there, what was the first thing he did? He peeled out the room and said, hey, everybody needs to leave me alone. And then he prayed. That's what I love to hear. I love to hear that prayer. He prayed that prayer, and then he spoke those words to Tabitha. He said, Tabitha, arise. Very easy, very, like I said, we didn't hear his prayer, but a very easy process for Peter on the surface. But Peter had the spiritual intellect to know, the trust, the faith that God was going to do this. And this is a very important lady to this community, very important to her ministry, very important to what she did. And God wasn't going to raise her from the dead because he needed her, because Tabitha needed to be raised from the dead. Tabitha was in heaven. He raised her from the dead because of the continued ministry that she was doing with Christ. But if you look at this, what would have given Peter the idea to do what he did? You shrugging your shoulders, Brother Neil? Kind of, sort of? Brother Roy? Sir?
Only God.
Only God. Yeah, that can answer a lot of our questions. Y'all flip over to Mark. Let's look at Mark chapter 6 right quick. I want to look at a couple verses. I'm sorry, Mark chapter 5 right quick. Verses 35 through 42. One quick little couple verses here. Let's look at Mark chapter 5, verse 35 through 42. So this is obviously right in the middle of Jesus' ministry on earth. It said, while he was still speaking, this is Jesus speaking, while Jesus was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any farther? As soon as Jesus heard the word from him spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid, only believe. And he permitted no one to follow him except for who? Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult in those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, why make all the commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they ridiculed him. But when he said, put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child who were with them and entered where the child was laying. He took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, rise. Immediately the girl rose and walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. But then he commanded them strictly to not say they shouldn't. Okay, let me go back up. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat. So here we have Peter watching Jesus basically do the same thing that he did. And what was the first thing that Jesus did? He was pretty calm, obviously, but he cleared the room. Everybody get out. Now, when you read this, that Talitha Kumi, basically says, little girl, rise. The Kumi is to rise. You can almost see it says, Tabitha, arise. The Kumi is arise. So we said, Tabitha, arise. Here is Talitha, arise. But we see that Peter was very involved in this miracle so many years back, and watched exactly what Jesus did, was able to partake in that. So I don't know if that gives us a little insight, Brother Roy, or not, or if that's just God speaking to him about telling him exactly what to do. But his natural instinct was to get everybody out of there, pray with the little girl, or pray with the lady, Tabitha, and ask her to arise. It says she opened her eyes and saw Peter as she sat up. I'm reading a book now. I got it from a client a couple months ago. It's called Imagine Heaven. Has anybody read the book Imagine Heaven? It's about a guy. He was a believer. He was he did a bunch of research on people that have died, that have had heaven experiences, and came back to life. And he's kind of chronicled all these things. And almost every one of them wanted to stay in heaven. Almost every one of them wanted to stay there, which Why wouldn't we? Absolutely. You know, the people that went to heaven and they came back to earth, and they were upset because they wanted to stay. They wanted to stay in heaven. And you could probably think a little bit about that about Tabitha when she got back, that she wanted to stay in heaven just like we all would have. But but God obviously brought her back to life. And then you read on down a little bit, verse 41. It said, "Then he gave her his hand and lifted her up, and when they called the saints and widows, he presented her alive." Now that word saint, this is the second. If you look back up in verse 30, and I'm kind of flipping up through there now. A couple verses up above that, I think at 32. Yeah, 32. It mentions the word saint. This is the first two times it's mentioned in the New Testament that Luke used that word saints. So we know the word saints in the New Testament means fellow believers or fellow brothers. That's actually, the translation is actually fellow brothers that are set apart, fellow believers that are set apart. That saints word. So when they come out of the room, the widows are there, and these saints are there, these other believers that are there that probably come to rally around Tabitha and Tabitha's family. And they present her alive. But they had all these, you can imagine this is celebration of them. They still had all these clothes and the things that Tabitha had made and all this stuff that they remembered her by when they come out of the room. But he presented her alive. In verse 42 is probably the neatest verse of the story. It said, "And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed on the Lord." Just because of this story, many believed on the Lord. You know, we have several times in the New Testament it says, "And many came to faith that day." You know, kind of round up one of the sermons that somebody preached. Many people came faith that day. But God used this very well-known lady in this town to bring her back to life, to affect this whole community, and to make this whole community, point the whole community towards Christ. Just like our athlete that we looked at a minute ago, that was very well known, went to Olympics, came back with his gold medal, very well known, using him in his community as a great ambassador. But we know she was a sower. We know what she did. We know she had a love. We know she was probably a very essential person in that community. But she was doing what she wanted to do. She was doing it right where she wanted to do, right where she wanted to work, right where she wanted to do it. But God put a little change in her life that put a little ripple effect in that community and changed some folks in that community. And just like Brother Kelly preached last week about change is always good in our lives to have when it pushes other people closer to Christ. We have a little ripple effect and push other people closer to Christ. But there was something about Tabitha being raised from the dead that didn't, God wasn't through with her yet. God wanted her to continue her ministry and continue having that ripple effect throughout Joppa like she did. And I'm completely out of time. So thank y'all for listening to me ramble on a little bit. I just encourage you guys that, when you're faced with some change in your life, some things happen like Brother Kelly mentioned and like we've been talking about last couple of weeks, to see how God can change that and add that ripple effect in our life to change other people and change our community, change our churches, and change our family for good. And don't forget choir practice. Miss Sue's already taken roll, so if you go home, she's going to know it. Let me pray for us and we'll get out of here. Lord Jesus, we thank you again for tonight. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for allowing us to study your word tonight. Lord, thank you for being, Lord, the author of our life, Lord, writing our life for us, giving us your insight, Lord, your Holy Spirit to speak to us, to help us make the right decisions. And Lord, help us to make a ripple effect in our community. Help us to impact other people for good. And help us to live a life like Tabitha, Lord. Just have a heart of goodness, a heart of kindness. And, Lord, do good for other people. And, Lord, I pray you bless our ministries, Lord, and bless us as we seek your direction, Lord. We love you and thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.